In the misty mountains of North Carolina, something ancient and bloodthirsty stalks beneath the trees, waiting for nightfall. I'm Mr. Midnight Hollow, your terrifying host. If you're already part of our pack, your support means the world to us. Each like, comment, and share helps uncover more stories like this. Or subscribe to see what rises from the depths of darkness and unfolds before you. Now, let's begin. Frank Aldridge had driven the Blue Ridge Parkway more times than he could count. The curves were muscle memory now, the descent into Asheville always accompanied by the soft rustle of trees and the damp scent of moss and mountain pine. Retired, alone and approaching 70, Frank found peace in the early hours when the mist still hugged the asphalt and the radio kept him company. That morning, however, he didn't get far. Just past mile marker 384, something caught his eye on the roadside, a dark shape limping along the shoulder. As he slowed the truck, the shape lifted its head, and Frank saw her. A dog. No, a bitch, he corrected silently. Rough-coated, ribs visible, with one eye crusted shut and fur matted with dried blood. She didn't run. She stared him down, panting, growling low but not backing away. Frank parked. He stepped out carefully, palms open. "Easy, girl," he murmured. "Not here to hurt you." The dog's hackles were raised. Her left hind leg dragged. She was injured bad, and yet she stood her ground like a cornered wolf. Frank noticed something. Despite her wounds, she had a bulge under her belly. Pregnant. "Jesus," he muttered. "What the hell happened to you?" He wrapped her in an old army blanket from the truck and hoisted her into the back seat. She didn't resist, just lay there, breathing heavy, eyes flicking to the tree line, watching. Frank glanced that way too, but saw nothing except forest. By noon, she was bedded in his garage, in a crate lined with towels and straw. Frank lived just outside the city limits, a few miles from downtown Asheville. His house backed into the Pisgah National Forest. The nearest neighbor was half a mile down a gravel path. She refused food, but drank water in short bursts. Every sound outside made her ears twitch. Frank watched from the doorway, unsure what he'd just involved himself in. That night, just as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Frank got the first call. He recognized the voice, Mitch Fuller, deputy sheriff. Frank had served with Mitch's dad in Nam. They still spoke, though rarely. "Frank," Mitch said, voice low, urgent. "You hear anything strange last night?" "No," Frank answered slowly. "Why?" "We got a scene up north by Black Balsam Knob. Family cabin, 3 dead, mauled. We thought bear at first, but—" Frank waited. "But the wounds, Frank, they ain't like any bear I've ever seen. We found parts of 'em a good 20 feet apart. Blood sprayed halfway up the trees, no drag marks." Frank felt cold. "You're the only one out that way with traps or cameras. Seen anything odd?" Frank hesitated. He looked toward the garage. "No," he said finally. "Nothing." Mitch sighed. "Keep your eyes open. We'll be out canvassing the area." Frank hung up. He didn't sleep. Not because of the call, but because sometime after midnight, the dog began to growl, deep, long breaths of warning. She never barked, just growled, eyes on the garage window. Frank peeked through the blinds. There was nothing. The next morning, the dog had dug deep into the straw and was panting harder. Frank realized she was in labor. He rushed into town for supplies: canned food, sterile water, blankets, gauze, a pair of gloves. When he got back, she had birthed 3 pups. All alive. All healthy. 2 males, 1 female. She allowed Frank closer now. He cleaned the pups as best he could. Her eye never left his. There was intelligence there. Not trust. Something else. Calculation. That evening, Frank stepped onto his back porch and saw something he hadn't seen before. Tracks. Not boot prints, not deer or raccoon. These were large, spaced far apart, deep even in the packed dirt. Clawed. He followed them for a few feet before they vanished into the brush. That same night, a story broke on local news. Another body. A homeless man behind a convenience store on Tunnel Road. Frank switched off the TV. He walked into the garage. The dog was curled around the pups. "You're not just a stray," he whispered. "You came from something, or it came for you." Outside, the wind picked up, and from the tree line, he saw it. Not clearly, just movement. A tall, hulking shadow watching his house. Then it was gone. Frank bolted the garage, grabbed the old rifle from the closet. He wasn't religious. But that night, he prayed. Frank didn't sleep that night. He sat in the living room, shotgun resting across his knees, eyes locked on the door that led to the garage. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the wind outside made his grip tighten. The mountain air felt heavier than usual. Not just the humidity. Something else. Something pressing down. By dawn, the house was silent. But the sense of being watched hadn't faded. Frank stepped into the garage cautiously. The dog hadn't moved from her spot. Her body still coiled tightly around the pups, though her eye tracked him with that same predatory awareness. He crouched beside her and noticed the blood-stained towels. "You held out, didn't you?" he murmured. "Didn't die when you should have." The pup squirmed quietly against her belly. The smallest, the female, had a tiny white streak down her back. Frank couldn't help but feel something strange watching them. Something like awe. Survival born from suffering. By late morning, Frank was installing heavy-duty locks on every door. He wasn't being paranoid. Those tracks outside. They hadn't belonged to any natural animal, not in these mountains. And that shadow he'd seen, he hadn't imagined it. He'd spent years in war zones. He knew the feeling of being hunted. The day passed slow. The forest beyond the yard was too quiet. No birds. No squirrels darting across the lawn. Just silence. At sunset, Frank walked the property's edge, rifle slung over his shoulder. He stopped at the spot where the tracks had vanished. The soil was disturbed again. Something had come closer. He knelt. The prints were fresh, and beside them deep impressions, like something had knelt there, or crouched, watching. He stood, heart racing, and scanned the tree line. Still nothing. That night, the tension in the air felt worse. The garage was dim, lit only by a hanging lamp above the tool bench. The dog slept lightly, ears twitching at every noise. Then, just past 2 a.m., Frank woke to a sound outside. Not a howl, not a growl, just a crack like a branch snapping under pressure. He slipped out of bed barefoot and crept to the back window. It was out there again, closer this time. The shape was massive, crouched low behind the shed. Frank could barely make out details, but what he did see chilled him. Broad shoulders, arms too long for a man, a head with ears too pointed, not a bear, not a man, something in between, and then eyes, yellow and faintly glowing. Frank backed away from the window and hurried to the garage. The dog was already standing, her teeth bared. Her body trembled, not from fear, but readiness. "Stay with them," Frank whispered. "Don't let it take them." He locked the garage door behind him and took position by the front window. Nothing. For minutes. Then, a noise. Metal, creaking. From the back porch. Frank moved fast, shotgun aimed. He flipped the light switch and opened the curtain. Something had pulled the screen door loose. It lay hanging by one hinge. No sign of the creature. He waited, finger on the trigger. Breath, slow. Then it happened. From the side of the house, glass shattered. The living room window exploded inward. Frank dropped, rolled behind the couch. A shape burst in, a blur of fur and claws. It was in the house. He fired. The blast lit the room. The figure recoiled, slammed into a wall, then darted toward the hallway. Frank jumped up, heart pounding, reloading. The house was quiet again, but only for a moment. From the garage came a sound he would never forget. The dog snarling, followed by high-pitched yelps. The pups. Frank ran, slamming into the garage door. He threw it open, expecting carnage. But what he saw stopped him cold. The creature had burst halfway through the side wall. Splinters and insulation everywhere. One long arm was reaching inside. But the dog was on it. She had latched onto the creature's forearm, shaking violently. Blood splattered the concrete. The pups were cowering under the workbench, whining. Frank fired again. The creature reared back, yanking its arm free, dragging the dog with it for a moment before slamming her into the wall. Her body hit hard, but she got up. Wounded, covered in blood, but still standing. The creature locked eyes with Frank, and then it fled, crawling backward into the trees like a shadow retreating from flame. Frank dropped to his knees beside the dog. Her side was torn, ribs exposed. She whimpered once, then slumped. No, stay awake, Frank begged. He tore open the first aid kit, pressing towels to the wound. The pups crept out, huddling around her snout. He stayed with her until the sun rose. Her breath was shallow. Her eye fluttered. But she lived, and Frank knew, beyond all doubt now, it wasn't done. It had come for the pups. It had tasted blood. And it would return. Frank spent the next morning reinforcing the house. He boarded the shattered window, dragged a heavy oak dresser against the garage door, and made sure the rifle stayed loaded. The dog, who he now simply called the mother, rested in a bed of towels near the tool bench. Her breathing was shallow but steadier. Every few minutes, she lifted her head to check on the pups before drifting again into a half-conscious state. Frank kept checking her wounds. They were deep, but not infected yet. He'd seen men survive worse. What scared him wasn't the wounds. It was the clear intelligence in her gaze. She recognized the thing that had attacked, recognized its scent, its presence, and she feared nothing except it getting near the pups. By noon, Asheville had erupted into chaos. Frank was sipping lukewarm coffee when a breaking news alert flashed on the TV. A reporter stood outside a convenience store on Merriman Avenue. Police cars surrounded the alley. Blue lights flickered across brick walls stained with something dark. "This is the third violent death in a week," the reporter said, voice shaking. "Authorities have not released details, but the victim was found in pieces, scattered across the pavement." Frank turned up the volume. Police are advising residents to stay indoors at night. Wildlife officials deny involvement of any known animal species. He shut off the TV. Wildlife officials. They had no idea. Outside, crows circled above the treetops. Their calls echoed against the hills. Frank watched them with a knot in his stomach. Nature always reacted before humans understood. He spent the afternoon cleaning the garage, preparing for whatever would come next. At one point, he stepped out onto the gravel driveway and scanned the forest that bordered his property. The trees swayed with a slow, steady movement. Though there was no wind, the hair on his arms stood up. That's when he heard tires crunching gravel. A sheriff's SUV pulled into the drive. Deputy Mitch Fuller climbed out, pale and exhausted. Frank lowered his rifle. "You look like hell," he said. "Wish that was the worst of it," Mitch replied. He adjusted his belt and wiped sweat from his forehead. We found another set of tracks behind the convenience store. Too big for a dog, too upright for a bear. Frank felt his pulse quicken. How upright? Mitch sighed. About 3 feet between steps. Frank's stomach turned. That matched what he'd seen near the shed. You find anything else? Frank asked. Mitch nodded slowly. One of the bodies. Frank, the torso was found on a dumpster roof. Took a ladder to get it down. Frank exhaled hard. I told you something was out here. You didn't tell me a damn thing, Mitch snapped, eyes narrowing. Any animals around your place acting strange? Frank hesitated. A stray, beat up, showed up on the side of the parkway. Where is it? In the garage. Had pups. Mitch stiffened. Mind if I take a look? Frank thought about saying no, but something in Mitch's face, fear, maybe, made him relent. Fine, but don't touch anything. They stepped into the garage. Mitch froze. Sweet mother, he whispered. The dog's torn flesh, the blood-matted fur, the deep claw marks around the crate. None of it was normal. Mitch crouched, studying the damage to the wall where the creature had forced its way in. Something pushed through 8 inches of insulation and plywood like it was cardboard, Mitch murmured. Frank? What did this? Frank didn't answer. He didn't need to. Mitch stood, swallowing hard. We need backup. Animal control, wildlife experts, everyone. They won't believe you, Frank said. They'll say it's panic. Mitch rubbed his forehead. They'll believe me when they see another body. Before Frank could respond, the radio on Mitch's shoulder crackled to life. Unit 7, respond to a reported assault on Hendersonville Road. Multiple callers reporting screams. Unknown number of victims. Mitch's face drained. That's only 10 minutes from here. Frank's blood went cold. Mitch backed toward the SUV. Stay inside. Lock everything. I'll check in later. The sheriff's vehicle sped down the gravel road, kicking dust into the air. Frank stood alone in the driveway, listening as the sound faded into the distance. Then he heard something else, a faint rustling coming from the trees, slow, deliberate. He stepped back toward the house. As the sky darkened, Asheville's peaceful mountain charm dissolved into tension. Sirens wailed in the distance. Word spread fast through neighborhoods. Something was out there. Something tearing through people with no pattern, no motive. By dusk, the mother dog tried standing. She staggered, collapsed, then forced herself up again. Frank knelt beside her. You need to rest, he whispered. She ignored him, staring at the garage door. She knew something he didn't. Something was coming. When the first scream echoed through the woods, Frank felt it in his bones. It wasn't close, but not far enough. A human voice, torn apart by agony. Then another. He grabbed his shotgun and shut off all the lights in the house, save for a dim lamp in the hallway. Shadows stretched across the walls. The pups huddled together, trembling. The mother positioned herself in front of them despite her wounds. Frank stood at the window, scanning the yard. Inside the woods, a figure moved. Not running, walking, upright, tall. Frank's breath hitched. Then it stepped into the faint moonlight, and Frank saw the outline of a massive torso, long limbs, and a head that wasn't human. But the worst part wasn't the creature. The worst part was what it dragged behind it. A body, or what was left of one. Missing limbs, missing parts. Frank wished he hadn't recognized. He backed away from the window, heart hammering. The creature stopped at the edge of the yard, and then it dropped the body. A warning, a message, a declaration of territory. Frank raised the shotgun, though his hands shook. The creature lifted its head, and it looked directly at the house. Frank backed away from the window, forcing himself to breathe in steady, measured pulls. His heartbeat felt like it might rip through his chest. The creature stood just beyond the porch light's reach, motionless, as if carved from the darkness surrounding it. The mangled corpse it had dropped lay twisted on the grass, barely recognizable as human. Frank gripped the shotgun tighter, fighting the instinct to flee. He stepped slowly toward the garage, where the mother dog had begun to grow restless. Her teeth were clenched, breath sharp, muscles trembling as she angled herself in front of the pups. Her wounds still seeped, but fear didn't seem to exist inside her anymore. Only readiness. Frank scanned the house, checking the boarded windows, the locked doors, the barricaded side entrances. He'd reinforced everything he could. But he knew, deep down, that whatever lurked out there wasn't interested in fences or locks. It wanted something inside his home. The pups whined softly. The sound echoed through the garage like a flare in the dark. The creature outside tilted its head, and then it moved. Not a run, not a charge, just a slow, deliberate step toward the house. Frank lifted the shotgun. "Stop," he whispered, though he knew the thing couldn't hear him, or worse, maybe it understood and didn't care. Then his phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. He grabbed it. A text from Mitch. "We got another one, South Asheville. Faceless, eyes gone, tongue ripped out. Not an animal." Frank's blood froze. Another message came seconds later. "Heading your way after. Lock everything. Tell me if you see anything." Frank typed back, "It's here." He didn't get a reply. Outside, the creature stepped closer. Frank raised the gun, sighting it through the glass pane of the front door. But before he could fire, the creature seemed to dissolve into the shadows, like its body folded back into the dark. Frank listened. Nothing. No footsteps, no breathing, no movement. He hated when it went silent. The mother dog's body tensed as she stared at the garage side wall. Frank followed her gaze. The wood paneling swayed slightly, as if something was pressing on it from outside. Then, it bowed inward. Frank cursed under his breath. He grabbed a crowbar from the tool rack and braced himself. The wall trembled again. Dust trickled down from the rafters. Something scraped against the siding, slow and methodical. Not claws, fingers. Frank lunged forward and rammed the crowbar against the bulging panel. "Back off!" he barked. The pressure stopped, for a moment. Then the creature hit the wall hard enough to send a crack splitting across the plaster. The shelves rattled. Tools clattered on the floor. One of the pups let out a terrified cry. The mother dog limped forward, placing herself between the wall and her litter. Her shoulders shook from exhaustion, yet she didn't retreat even an inch. Frank moved to her side. "If it gets through, we make it pay," he whispered. Another impact rocked the wall, this time so hard that one of the boards snapped, leaving a narrow opening to the outside. Through it, Frank glimpsed part of a face, elongated, covered in coarse fur, with rows of sharp teeth visible through a half-open mouth. Frank swung the crowbar, smashing the wood back into place. The creature responded with another shove, widening the hole. Frank raised the shotgun and fired through the breach. A grunt of pain came from the other side, followed by something heavy stumbling away. The garage fell silent. Frank lowered the shotgun, but he didn't relax. The quiet was too sudden, too complete. He stepped outside the garage door and scanned the yard. The corpse the creature had left earlier was gone. Drag marks streaked the dirt leading back into the trees. Frank's stomach churned. "It's moving the body," he muttered. "Why?" He walked deeper into the yard, but something caught his eye near the shed, a piece of torn clothing. He knelt, a fragment of denim soaked through with blood. and beside it, scratches on the ground, a pattern that wasn't random. 3 lines, 3 slashes, parallel, a mark. Frank swallowed. Was it a warning, a claim, a sign to others? A branch snapped somewhere behind him. Frank spun, shotgun raised, but the yard was empty. He exhaled slowly, backing toward the house. Inside the garage, the mother dog lifted her head, ears pinned back. Frank followed her gaze to the garage entrance. Something shifted in the shadows at the threshold. A shape emerged from the darkness. Tall, broad, human-shaped, almost. Frank froze. It wasn't the same creature from earlier. This one was smaller, leaner, younger. Its eyes glowed faintly, and its breath came in long, deliberate pulls. It stepped 1 foot into the garage. Frank aimed the shotgun. 1 more step, he warned, voice shaking. 1. The creature paused. It turned its head slightly as if listening. Then it stared at the pups. Not at Frank. Not at the mother. The pups. Frank squeezed the trigger. The blast filled the garage with dust and debris. The creature flew backward and hit the dirt outside. It twitched once, then went still. Frank stepped out cautiously, shotgun still raised. He approached the body. The creature's chest rose once, then fell. Dead. He knelt beside it. It wasn't fully transformed. The human features were still visible beneath the fur. The jaw was elongated, but the eyes, those eyes looked like a teenager's. A kid. Frank felt sick. What the hell? He couldn't finish. Behind him, the mother dog growled, not in fear, but urgency. Frank turned. The first creature, the large one, the one that had dropped the body in the yard, stood at the edge of the tree line, watching him. Its gaze moved from Frank to the dead one at his feet, back to Frank. Frank realized something horrific. It wasn't hunting, it was recruiting, and Frank had just killed one of its own. The creature stepped toward him. Frank bolted back into the garage and slammed the door. The creature collided with it so hard the hinges tore loose. Wood splintered. The door buckled. Frank grabbed the mother dog and the pups, dragging them toward the inner door. He knew the truth now. It wasn't trying to break in because it was hungry. It was trying to break in because of what the pups were. And it would tear the whole house down to get them. Frank didn't sleep that night. Not after watching the door nearly torn off its hinges. Not after seeing the creature's reaction to the dead one. It wasn't rage, it was grief and vengeance. That thing outside had plans. It knew what it was doing. By morning, the air felt thicker. Asheville was still drenched in early fall humidity, but it wasn't the weather that made breathing harder. It was dread. Frank sat at the kitchen table, polishing the old Colt .45 his father had left him. The shotgun was reloaded and propped by the back door. Every curtain was drawn. The mother dog rested on a blanket in the living room, her pups suckling beside her, tiny paws twitching. She was healing faster than she should have. Wounds that should take weeks had begun to scab. Her gait was steadier. Her eye, still cloudy, had regained a glint of something sharper. Not just instinct, awareness. Frank tried calling Mitch. Straight to voicemail. He tried again. Nothing. He flipped on the news. The anchors were pale and stumbling through pre-written scripts. The screen behind them showed police cars and hazmat teams near the southern edge of the city. Authorities have cordoned off a 3-block radius after an overnight attack left 4 residents dead and another 2 missing. Officials refuse to speculate on whether the recent deaths are connected. Witnesses describe the scene as indescribable. Frank turned it off. He didn't need their conclusions. He already knew. He went out to the shed and grabbed his last roll of barbed wire, wrapping it across the windows, over doors, even around the gutters. He poured salt across thresholds, though it felt absurd. He nailed iron horseshoes above the door frames, the way his grandfather used to swear would keep out the devil's kin. The mother dog watched him from the porch. Every time he moved too far from the pups, she growled, low, protective. Frank didn't blame her. Around noon, the wind shifted. Not in temperature, just in mood. The birds stopped. The squirrels vanished. Even the bugs went quiet. Frank stepped out back and scanned the woods. Then he saw it. On the edge of the property, impaled on a broken tree limb, was a deer carcass. Its body had been split cleanly down the center, the insides arranged deliberately in a circle around the trunk. A ritual, a sign. Frank approached slowly, shotgun in hand. As he got closer, the smell hit, not rot, but something worse. Like burning hair and blood soaked in rusted metal. He gagged and turned away. Clawed into the bark above the deer's head were symbols, sharp vertical lines intersected by slashes. Not letters, not numbers, marks, territorial. The message was clear. We're coming. Back inside, Frank opened the old metal lockbox under his bed. Inside were two things he hadn't touched in years, a flare gun and a folded American flag. He took the flare gun and loaded it, just in case. By nightfall, the mother dog was pacing the living room. Her energy had shifted. The pup sensed it too, huddled together, no longer playing, no longer whining. Frank sat in his recliner, gun resting on his lap, a bottle of bourbon untouched on the table. At exactly 9:43 p.m., the power went out. No wind, no storm, just gone. The silence became total. Not even the hum of insects remained. Frank stood slowly, lighting the oil lamp on the table. The flame flickered too much. Then came the sound. A whistle, not human. High-pitched, shrill, like wind screaming through hollow bone. Frank stepped to the window and peeked through the gap in the curtain. He saw them. Not one, not two, 5. 5 shapes standing just beyond the tree line, perfectly still. Tall, humanoid, covered in matted fur, their limbs long, unnatural. Eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. One of them, larger than the rest, carried something in its hand. Frank squinted. A severed human arm. They weren't hiding anymore. Frank moved fast. He blocked every remaining gap in the house. Moved the pups into the laundry room, reinforced the door. The mother followed, refusing to leave them. Then, something slammed against the back wall. Frank nearly dropped the lamp. He ran to the rear window. A flaming object had been thrown against the siding. The wood caught. Smoke began curling upward. He ran for the hose, but stopped short. The hose had been cut. They were trying to burn him out. Frank grabbed a bucket and filled it from the bathtub, dousing the flames before they spread. He coughed through the smoke, hands shaking. That's when he saw the note. Tied to a rock, tossed through the kitchen window. He picked it up. The handwriting was jagged, uneven, almost like it had been scratched in with claws. They are not yours. Return them, or we'll take them. Frank stared at the message, stomach churning. They could write. They could communicate. And more importantly, they believed the pups belonged to them. He dropped the note and checked the pups. Still safe, still breathing. He looked at the mother. She didn't flinch, didn't shake. Her body was wound like a trap ready to spring. Frank knew they weren't going to stop. They were escalating, testing. But the biggest test was yet to come. And just before midnight, the house phone rang. He hesitated before answering. Mitch? But the voice wasn't Mitch. It was deep, hoarse, broken. Barely human. Old man, it rasped. You were warned. Then silence. The line went dead. Frank stood frozen, the receiver shaking in his grip. The porch light outside flickered once, and then from the dark, a face appeared at the window, not human. The fight had truly begun. The face vanished from the window the instant Frank moved. He didn't scream, didn't freeze. He'd spent too many years in war zones to waste time on panic. He snapped the oil lamp off, plunging the room into shadow, then dropped to his knees and crawled toward the shotgun resting against the hallway wall. The mother dog growled from the laundry room, low and sharp. Not warning, ready. The pups whimpered, barely audible beneath the deep rumble of her chest. Then the sounds began. Not just one set of footsteps, dozens. Boots? No. Claws, nails against pavement, scratching across rooftops, tapping against windows. A surround. Frank peeked through a crack in the boarded living room window. The porch light flickered one final time and died. Across the street, the nearest neighbor's house, Todd Jensen, a mechanic, exploded with movement. A creature burst through a second-story window and dragged Todd's wife out by the throat. Frank watched in silent horror as she thrashed once, then went limp. The beast flung her body like garbage across the lawn. Then Frank heard screaming from the next house. And the next. In a matter of seconds, the entire neighborhood, 7 homes spaced across a winding forest road, erupted into slaughter. Lights flicked on, gunshots rang out. Then silence. Then screams. One house burst into flames, smoke rising fast into the sky. A dog barked once, then went silent with a cracking snap. Frank backed away from the window, heart pounding. He moved to the back of the house, passing by the mother dog. Her eyes met his. She didn't flinch. Just waited. Outside, something scraped against the garage siding. Frank dropped to a crouch, gun aimed. The sound stopped. Then a crash. Glass exploding upstairs. They were inside. Frank bolted for the stairs. He kicked open the guest room door just as a smaller creature lunged toward the hallway. He fired midair. The body hit the floor hard, twitching. It tried to crawl, blood pooling beneath it. Frank put a second round through its spine. Then something screamed from outside. A long, angry howl that vibrated the windows. A call. A command. Frank rushed downstairs. As he passed the kitchen, he saw something glowing through the window. Eyes. Dozens of them. Every direction. The woods, the porch, the backyard. They were surrounding the house. He ran to the laundry room, barricading the door behind him with a cabinet and 2 chairs. The mother dog rose, stiff but alert. The pups were tucked beneath her body. Frank knelt. They're not getting in here, not without a fight. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the house. The front door was giving way. Frank loaded his last 2 shells and handed the flare gun to the dog, then paused, realizing the absurdity of the gesture. "You're the only reason they're alive," he said, not expecting a response. "So if this is it, we go down doing something that matters." The front door collapsed in a shower of splinters. Boots, no, feet, heavy, clawed, struck the hardwood floor. They were inside. Frank positioned himself at the laundry door, shotgun raised, barrel trembling. Heavy footsteps approached. He braced. And then it came. The leader. Massive, hunched, its body covered in scarred black fur. One eye missing, just a hollow socket that glared with rage. The same beast from the first attack. The one he'd shot. The one that left a corpse in his yard. It stood in the hallway, sniffing the air. The others gathered behind it, at least 4, maybe more. Too many. Frank aimed. The creature didn't flinch. It raised its hand slowly and pointed. Not at Frank, at the door behind him, at the pups. Frank fired. The buckshot hit square in the beast's chest. It stumbled, roared, and the hallway erupted with movement. Frank ran back and kicked the door to the laundry room fully shut. He jammed the lock, then wedged a crowbar through the handles. Outside they charged. The walls trembled. Drywall cracked. Dust rained from the ceiling. The mother dog growled and stepped forward. Frank lit the flare gun. "If they break through," he said, "we torch this room. They don't get them." The mother barked, sharp, final. Then the door began to buckle. They slammed it again and again. The hinges tore, wood splintering. Then, silence. Frank held his breath. Were they regrouping, planning, or waiting? He opened the dryer door and shoved the pups inside, laying towels across them to dampen noise. The mother whimpered, nudging the door closed with her snout. Frank stepped back, gun aimed. The door exploded inward. 3 creatures charged. The mother dog lunged. She slammed into the first one mid-air, teeth finding flesh. Frank fired into the second, catching it in the shoulder. The third tackled him. They hit the ground hard. Frank felt claws rip into his arm. He jammed the shotgun between them and pulled the trigger. Blood and fur exploded over him. He shoved the corpse aside and turned. The mother had ripped the throat from one, but the third had her by the back leg, tearing. She howled in pain but turned, clamping down on its snout. Frank grabbed the flare gun. The beast facing the mother reared up. Frank fired. The flare hit the creature square in the chest, igniting fur, muscle, and screams. It ran, engulfed in flame, smashing into walls, collapsing part of the hallway. The others retreated. Frank dropped to his knees, panting. The mother collapsed beside the dryer, blood pooling beneath her. She was alive. But barely. Frank grabbed towels, pressed them to the wounds. "You're not dying. You hear me? You're not." He heard movement outside. Not retreat, not surrender. Just waiting. He crawled to the broken door, peered into the hallway. They were out there, not attacking. Just watching. And in the center of the destroyed living room, they had left something. A skull. Human. And carved into the bone, a symbol. A warning. This wasn't a hunt. It was a war. Frank spent the first hour after the attack cleaning blood off the pups. His hands trembled. Not from fear, but from the overwhelming fatigue that weighed on every nerve. His arm was wrapped in duct tape and gauze. His legs were covered in cuts. His home, barely standing. The mother dog was worse. Her body was slick with blood. Part of her flank had been shredded. But her breathing was steady. Her head remained up. She stayed by the dryer, not willing to move far from her pups, even as the house groaned with wind and threat. Frank pushed a couch against the laundry door and lit a second flare. It was the last one. The shotgun was empty now. The Colt .45 had 3 bullets left. He had knives, a hammer, a hatchet. But it wouldn't be enough. They were too many. Outside, the forest whispered. The wind carried with it a sickly smell, wet fur, old blood, ash. Frank glanced at the kitchen clock. 4:38 a.m., almost morning, but dawn wouldn't stop them. They didn't care about light. They weren't vampires. They were predators, built for long hunts, built for extinction. He heard the floor creak in the front room. He wasn't alone. He cocked the revolver and crept forward. Step by step, careful not to make noise. As he reached the hallway, he saw a figure. Tall. Still, not moving. It wasn't one of them. It was a man. No fur, no claws, just a man in a dark jacket, standing barefoot on the ruined hardwood, face half burned, one eye swollen shut. Frank raised the gun. "You move, I shoot." The man's lips curled slightly. "You think bullets are your answer?" Frank narrowed his eyes. "Talk, while you still have teeth." The man stepped forward. "You don't get it, do you? Those aren't monsters out there. They're kin. Blood. The bitch you're protecting? She ran from the pack. She chose to breed outside. That's why they want her pups. They're mixed. They're wrong. Frank's jaw tightened. They're alive, and I don't care about your twisted rules. They're not supposed to live, the man said. They're not supposed to exist. Frank shot him in the knee. The man dropped hard, howling. Frank stepped over him. And you weren't supposed to talk. The man laughed through the pain. You're too late. They're coming. The alpha. He waited. Let the others soften you. But now he's ready. Frank's blood went cold. Alpha? The man grinned. He's bigger than all of them, stronger, smarter. You'll know him by the scars. One eye, the one you hurt. Then the man jerked, spasmed. His back arched. His fingers twisted. Bones cracked. Frank stepped back, horrified, as the man's body began to change. Fur burst from skin. The jaw split and lengthened. The legs bent backward with a sickening pop. Frank fired once, into the transforming creature's head. The shot rang through the house like thunder. The body collapsed, half transformed, twitching. Frank didn't breathe until it was still. Then, silence, not outside, inside. He turned slowly, and he saw it. Standing in the doorway of the ruined garage, the alpha, 7 feet tall, broad-shouldered, covered in matted black fur. One eye gone, the other glowed with furious intelligence. Its jaw opened slightly. It sniffed the air. Then, it spoke. You killed my blood. Frank raised the revolver. Then come get yours. The creature lunged. Frank fired. One shot missed. One hit the shoulder. One hit the jaw, ricocheting off bone. The alpha barreled into him. Frank slammed against the wall, ribs cracking. The revolver flew across the floor. The alpha raised a claw. But before it could strike, the mother dog attacked. She launched from the hallway, fangs bared, teeth tearing into the alpha's leg. He roared, spinning, trying to shake her off. She held. Frank crawled for the revolver, blood in his eyes. The alpha slammed the dog against the fridge. She yelped but didn't release. Frank grabbed the Colt, fired into the beast's side. It howled. Frank swung a frying pan from the counter, smashing the creature's snout. The mother dog bit down harder. The alpha dropped to one knee, clawing at her, trying to gouge her off. Frank stabbed it with a kitchen knife, into the neck. Blood poured out, hot and dark. The alpha reeled back, slamming into the kitchen island. The dog released her bite and staggered. Frank pulled her behind him. The alpha stood, panting, swaying. Frank raised the flare gun. This is your last warning, the alpha growled. The bloodline dies. Frank fired. The flare hit the creature dead center in the chest. It erupted in flame. The alpha screamed and staggered backward, crashing into the wall, then out through the back door, tumbling into the yard. Frank followed. The creature flailed, skin bubbling, fur burning. But it didn't fall. It stood, charred, smoking, still alive. It looked at Frank one last time, then fled into the trees, leaving a trail of smoke and blackened blood behind. Frank dropped to his knees. The sun was rising. The mother limped out beside him, one eye closed, body trembling. The pups, still alive. But this wasn't over. Not yet. The sunrise bled slowly over the Blue Ridge Mountains, casting the city of Asheville in cold, golden light. Smoke rose from the trees behind Frank's house, thin, bitter trails left by the burning alpha as it fled into the forest. The battle was over. The survivors remained. But Frank didn't move. He sat in the yard with the revolver in his lap, eyes locked on the tree line. His arm was broken. Blood caked his hands. His ribs screamed with every breath. The mother dog lay at his side, half-conscious, ribs showing, her body wrapped in gauze and duct tape. The pups were curled under a blood-stained blanket, alive, quiet, not a whimper among them, as if they sensed the fight was paused, but not ended. Not yet. Frank didn't hear sirens. No backup came. No neighbors wandered over to ask questions. The entire neighborhood had gone silent, like the massacre had erased every trace of life. He'd seen the bodies, neighbors torn apart, homes destroyed. And no one came, because the town was afraid. Afraid to see what was left. By midday, Frank tried to stand. Pain shot through his legs. He hobbled back into the house and began cleaning. He burned the corpses, poured gasoline over the dismembered creature in the hallway and the one half-shifted man in the living room. He lit the flames without ceremony. When the fire was out, he patched the walls, hammered broken beams into place, covered the blood with new paint. The house would never be the same, but it would stand. The pups began to crawl again by dusk. Their eyes were open now, clear, bright, but not normal. Frank saw it in the shape of their pupils, the slight sheen in the dark. The way their ears twitched at sounds too far for his own hearing. They were changing. And deep down, he knew. They weren't just hybrids. They were something new. The mother dog limped beside them, always guarding. She barely ate. She rarely slept, but she never looked away. That night, Frank sat on the porch with a cigar and a bottle of bourbon. The silence outside was unnatural. No owls, no frogs, no movement. Then the wind shifted. He smelled it again, wet fur, charred flesh, and copper blood. He stood slowly, heart pounding. From the woods, eyes blinked open, not glowing, watching. They didn't move closer. They didn't growl. They just stared. Dozens of them. Waiting. Frank whispered, "You lost." But something inside him knew. They didn't consider it a loss. They'd tested him, burned his neighborhood, learned his defenses, and now they were waiting for something else. Then the smallest of the pups, barely 6 pounds, staggered to the edge of the porch and stared back at the tree line. And it growled. Not a yelp, not a bark, a guttural, instinctive sound of defiance. The creatures in the woods shifted, then backed away, gone in seconds. Frank's hands trembled, not from fear, from understanding. They weren't here for the mother anymore. They were here for the offspring. They had expected weakness. Instead, they'd found resistance. The pups had survived the bloodline war, and now they were something neither side had anticipated. And perhaps something stronger. The next morning, Frank loaded his truck. Supplies, water, ammunition, rope, medical kits. He wasn't staying. Asheville had gone quiet. Too quiet. Officials were calling it a wildfire. Gas line explosions, wild animal attacks. Frank didn't care what they called it. He just knew it wasn't done. He lifted the mother dog carefully into the back seat, laid her on folded blankets. The pups climbed in after her, nestling against her fur. Before closing the door, Frank looked once more at the woods. He whispered, "If you want them, you'll have to follow me." He started the engine and pulled away, tires crunching over gravel soaked in dried blood. As he drove past the ruins of his neighbors' homes, he saw no bodies, only scorch marks. Silence. He reached the city line and didn't stop, because he'd seen the writing on the wall. The war hadn't ended. It had shifted. A new bloodline had entered the world, and now, both sides would come for it. Asheville was just the first battleground. The pup slept soundly in the back. The mother's eye flickered open for a moment, then closed. Frank glanced at the rearview mirror, saw the highway stretch into the horizon. He didn't know where he was going. But he'd keep driving until the world gave him a reason to stop. Until the next moon rose. Because he understood now. Some monsters die. Others just wait. And some are being born. Frank's battle in Asheville is a savage reminder that some wars are fought not with armies, but with instinct, blood, and the will to protect. The rise of a new bloodline has only just begun, and we'll be watching to see what hunts them next. Like this video if you felt the weight of survival pressing down with every second. Comment below. What moment chilled you the most? And share this with someone who still believes monsters don't walk among us. Finally, if you've got the courage, subscribe to Mr. Midnight Horror and ring the bell, because out here, knowledge might be the only thing that keeps the shadows at bay.